just too quiet with no music. It feels weird.
My name is Leia Sutton, and I run and own Little Falls Custom Framing and Gallery. I do custom archival framing of pretty much anything, from the very tiny to the obscenely large. I actually have an obscenely large project on my table right now. It is larger than my table, literally. I live in Gorham, so I wanted to move it closer to home. The previous location in Portland was kind of lousy. Not a great location, no parking. This space that I have here in Gorham is much nicer. The light is fabulous. It's easy to heat. I have parking, and it's less expensive. So yeah, it's a great location all around. It's a little off the beaten path. I mean, even for Gorham, but you know, I get a lot of customers from Wyndham and Standish and Sebago area, and the frame shop in Wyndham just closed this summer. They retired, so. Now, other than Portland, I think the next closest frame shop is in Saco. So as people find me, they're glad I'm here because they don't have to brave the Portland traffic. When I first opened, Sawyer's Market was still open. They have since closed. That building is being renovated. Somebody bought it, and I have no idea what their plans for it are. I would love to see another village market type place go in there. You know, my little pie-in-the-sky dream is that Rosemont would come in, but that's not going to happen. I think the area could handle a Rosemont because there are a lot of upscale subdivisions going in around here, and I think that would be great, but it's not going to happen. So no, I'm about it for business. You know, there's the gas station down the road, and there's the Blue Seal down that way, and there are a few things around, but I think the town has plans for kind of working on this area, and I've seen work on the sidewalks further down 202, and they redid the 202 bridge, which that did a great job on the 202 bridge. Kudos. You know, there is a lot of traffic up and down this road, so people see the sign, and not infrequently someone will come in and it's like, oh, I've seen your sign and I've been meaning to come in here forever and I finally have time. So I think there are a lot of people out there like that who haven't gotten the time or the round to it yet. So it's touch and go, but it's going more often than not. And I'm using Facebook mostly. I've put some ads in the local papers, the Gorham Times, the Lakes Region, Forecaster. I don't get a lot of hits off print advertising. It might be just me that I'm doing it wrong, because that's entirely possible. What I don't know about marketing fills volumes, literally. I have a lot to learn about drawing attention to myself. I generally don't like doing it, and now I have to, so. It's a big learning curve, but there's been a lot of word of mouth. Most people who get something custom framed only do it once or twice a year. There are a few people who do it a lot because they have a collection that they continually add to, or they find me and they're like, I have all this stuff, and so they kind of bring it in and, you know, fits and starts. But most people who get something custom framed, they do something for someone for Christmas, or they do something for someone for graduation, or they find, wow, this really beautiful painting that I can finally afford and I want to get it framed, and that's kind of like a one-time thing. So for my kind of shop, I need a really broad customer base because they're not frequent flyers. I do have a few people who are frequent flyers. One thing that I do that a lot of custom frame shops don't do, or they don't like to do, is reuse pre-existing frames. I have a couple customers who bring me either antique frames or just frames that they've found somewhere, and I cut mats and glass to fit their thing into that frame, or I can actually take the frame apart, cut it down, rebuild it. And it saves a lot of money because, with the exception of large pieces, with the exception of museum-grade plexiglass and some textile jobs where the labor is more expensive, in most cases the frame is the most expensive part. So I don't really see myself as being in the business of selling framing. I am in the business of helping people preserve stuff that matters to them and get it up on the wall where they can see it. So if that means that I sometimes use an old frame to save them some money, I do it because that's what I see my business is doing. The one that always sticks out in my mind is the Kurdish Iranian goat skin. Something that a customer brought me when I was working at a frame shop in Bangor. And it was something that had been left with her by a Kurdish exchange student that had been staying with her in the 70s. And it had this really intricate, traditional Kurdish illustration on it of some kind of, a people from some kind of legend. I'm not familiar with the mythology of Kurdish Iran. But so anyway, so he left this with her. It was a family heirloom of his, and he was going back to Iran to get his family out because the Iranian Revolution and Khomeini had it in for the Kurds, and he never came back. So this woman was asking me, was like, "Do you think this is worth framing?" I'm like, "Yes, it is." This thing was actually in really good shape because it had been rolled up. She'd kept it really nicely, so it wasn't an issue of conservation, but definitely of preservation. And I also want to draw the distinction between conservation and preservation. I do preservation. Conservation means repair, fixing damage. I don't do that. That takes a whole nother set of skills, a whole nother, if you're serious about it, a whole nother 4 years of college. If I was 10 years younger and had the money, I would go to school for that because it would be so interesting and so much fun. But I'm not there. It's one of those things I know a little bit about, just enough to know what my limitations are, which is really important. There are some things I can do, but most of it I can't do. And I always try to make that clear to people, because a lot of people don't understand, when they hear preservation, they think, oh, you can take care of this thing that I have that's falling apart. And it's like, I can put it in a package that will keep it as it is, but I can't fix it. There are people out there who can fix things. It costs a lot of money. But yeah, for some things, it's definitely worth it. That is exactly the sort of thing that I want to help people preserve. Now, oftentimes it's something that their family had or that they found and think is interesting. That was a particularly poignant story. Artist. I have my own art in here for sale. The business that I took over came with a lot of art because framers, myself included, are pack rats and never throw anything away. So I have art from the old shop in Portland that had been tucked away there since, I'm sure, its inception in 1972. And I started out, and I am still interested in showing other local artists, but I got to the point where it wasn't, I don't like trying to track them down, find somebody. I kind of put out online on Facebook, hey, I have a gallery in Gorham. I'll give, if I send me some pictures of your artwork, if I like it, I'll give you a show. And I thought people would come and say, hey, I want a show. Here's my artwork. Do you like it? Nobody did. I got one person. So instead, I just decided, you know what? I have a lot of my own artwork that I'd like to sell. And the business has a lot of artwork that I'd like to sell. I'll just show that stuff every month. And I used to have monthly openings, and I don't do that anymore because then I end up bringing a bottle of wine home, and then my husband drinks it because I don't drink, and it's just a whole big thing. So hopefully down the road, I'd like to get back into that kind of thing. I've always loved fabric, and I used to make clothes for myself, and I always tinkered with sewing and, ever since I was little. But I started out as a painter as far as art, as far as making art goes. I started out as a painter. And then for various circumstances, I was led to work in a space where I couldn't really make a mess. Fabric is a lot easier to clean up than paint. So kept my paint in boxes and pulled out the fabric and came to realize that this is really interesting. Just from a technical standpoint, figuring out how to render a scene in fabric and other textiles as opposed to paint is completely different. And there's a lot of just figure out the engineering of how do I do this. So it's fun. There's a lot that I have to figure out. It's kind of like putting together a puzzle that you're building as you go along. And also I really enjoy seeing how people react to my textile pieces as opposed to my paintings, because I feel like everyone, regardless of their background, whether they're artistically inclined or not at all, people have some kind of connection to a textile of some sort. We all wear clothing. We all have a memory of an apron that our grandmother wore, or a flannel shirt that our great-grandfather wore, or something like that. And when they see a picture made out of fabric, they react to it differently than just a painting, because not very many people have a personal history with a tube of paint. They can't relate to that, how it feels, how it goes on the canvas. But when people see a landscape that I've made and it's got fabric from clothes that I've taken apart and some knitting and some, like linen tablecloth that I've used in part of it, or some old hand-tatted lace, almost everyone has some kind of memory of something like that in their own lives, and so they react to it so differently. And it's really cool to see that personal connection. And also people say, wow, I've never seen somebody do that with fabric before. And it's like, and some people have told me, I'll never look at fabric the same way again. I'm like, awesome. And, and it's just, and I also like breathing new life into pre-existing things. I like the idea of recycling materials. Fabrics do not break down in landfills quickly at all. The textile industry is probably one of, if not the greatest contributor to landfill mass. And, my own little self isn't making much of a dent in that, but that's okay. I can do what I can do, and hey, and it's fun. I take apart a piece of clothing and I'm left with all these kind of weird shapes of fabric, and this kind of looks like that, and I'll stick that over there, and this color's kind of cool, and it goes there. And I've gotten to the point where if I buy a piece of fabric off a bolt from a fabric store, it's just a flat piece of fabric in a square, and it doesn't have anything to say, and I have a really hard time using it because it's not telling me anything. So I just like shove it in with the other fabric and hope some of that wears off before I pull it out a few years later. And it's like, all right, do you have a story yet? Okay, let's see if we can do something with this. But, This is my insanely large project. This is an antique map of the state of Maine from 1862. This giant frame here is the frame that's going on the map upstairs, and it's just here because I'm not ready for it upstairs yet. And yeah, I've got one more corner to drill and nail, but the glue's been set for a few days now, so. This needs to be full-blown archival. It's actually in remarkably good shape. There aren't any holes or, any glaring holes or anything in it, but it does need to be all removable. And rice paper hinges, wheat paste, the whole 9 yards. And thankfully they're not in a hurry, because this is taking me longer than I thought it would. Case in point, I never charge people for my learning curve. So when they come in, I say, okay, it's gonna be this much, and it doesn't change. That's how much it's gonna be. Whether it takes me more time or not, I just, chalk this up as knowledge and I'll apply it to the next thing. Now, as you can see, I do a little bit of everything. I've gotten into spinning, and that's kind of addicting, so that's kind of dangerous. So yeah, I sit here and I make stuff in between customers, or if I'm a lot of time building frames, a lot of building frames involves waiting for glue to dry. So while I'm waiting for glue to dry, I do this. But the gallery space is wonderful. I love the light in here, even at night when it's dark and just the way the ceiling light is, the light in here is great. I could not be happier with it. Don't trust anybody with no vices.